When countries strike oil, most treat it like a payday. Spend it, grow fast, and deal with the consequences later. But Norway did something radically different. Instead of spending its oil wealth, Norway built one of the most powerful financial machines in history, the government pension fund, turning a temporary resource into permanent national wealth. No boom and bust, no political free-for-all, just discipline, rules, and long-term thinking. So how did they actually build it? Well, let's walk through the timeline from the moment oil was discovered in the North Sea to the creation of a $1 trillion fund that now owns a piece of nearly every major company on Earth. In 1969, oil is discovered in the North Sea, and suddenly Norway is sitting on something massive. But instead of rushing, they slow down. In the 1970s, Norway makes a critical decision. The oil belongs to the people. They build a state-controlled energy sector and start thinking long-term. And by the 1980s, oil money is flowing. And the temptation, of course, is to spend it and grow fast. But policymakers are already worried about overheating the economy. And so by 1990, this is the turning point. Norway creates what becomes the government pension fund, not to spend, but to save. And in 1996, the first real money goes into the fund. From here on out, oil revenues don't go straight into the economy, they go into the fund. And into the 2000s, the fund goes global. Stocks, bonds, real estate. Norway quietly becomes a shareholder in the world. By 2010, strict rules are locked in. Only a small percentage can be used each year, and the rest protected for future generations. Today, that fund is now worth over $1 trillion, owning pieces of thousands of companies worldwide, all built from oil on money they refuse to spend. And that's the key. Norway didn't just find oil, they built a system to outlast it. I'm Mike, joined by Paul McCucci. Paul, thanks for talking to me about this.
Oh yeah, definitely, Mike. This is on my mind every day.
Yeah, I've noticed this. We've had a lot of conversations about it. In fact, we had a conversation on a podcast recently about it. Let's have a look at that. What occurs to me is that the risk analysis has not included we might have a rainy day. We might have a problem politically in the world. We don't have any means of fortifying ourselves because we don't have any production, because we don't manufacture, because we don't have an export product that makes a huge amount of money, because we don't tap our resources.
Because we sold Petro-Canada?
Yeah, there's $1 trillion potentially right there.
Yeah, because we sold a company that actually drilled and refined our major resource.
Yeah, and made it possible for us to have gas at an incredible price and still make money. No, we don't do that anymore.
No.
So in light of that, we don't have the rainy day fund that Norway has. Imagine we had $1 trillion right now, spending power in the world.
We could give a rebate.
Okay, so there you go, Paul. It was your idea.
Yeah.
Now we're going to find out today.
Well, I talked about this quite a bit. Remember a few weeks ago when we brought it up, and we were doing shows on oil. And of course, the increase, the significant increase in oil prices, you know, I had it in my pocket when I was coming in. I filled up my truck coming in, and it cost me $200 in gas, which is about $50 more to fill up a tank of gas. And I knew that was going to happen when all this started to take off. And the question in my mind right away is, what happened to Petro-Canada? And I told the story on the show, and I won't get into it in depth here, but as a young man, I worked for Petro-Canada. And I worked in the marketing department of Petro-Canada. So I got to observe Petro-Canada when it was owned by the government.
Yep.
It was run by the government, and it was highly profitable. And then 1990 came around, the Conservatives came in, which we're going to talk about that in a minute, because Pierre Poilievre's acting like he had nothing to do with where we're at now, which I kind of laugh, because that's a Conservative Party issue. That was co-joined by the Liberals, by Chrétien after Kim Campbell. But they got rid of Petro-Canada. But Norway at the time didn't. And I remember this because I used to go to these presentations as a young man at North York Civic Center, where the head office of Petro-Canada was located in Toronto.
Oh, okay.
In North York. And I used to go to these meetings, and they used to always refer to Norway. So fast forward, you know, Mark Carney gets up, our prime minister gets up, and he says, we want to do a fund a wealth fund like they have in Norway. And here we are today.
And indeed, we are faced with what has been compared now to a pension fund that is so wildly successful in Norway that when our prime minister visited there, he must have been impressed by it, because he came home with the notion that we should have our own, I guess, national fund that would be similar to what Norway did.
Yeah, well, they brag about it, right? They're, of course, it's trillions of dollars. It's done magnificent for the country.
Absolutely.
But what he fails to, and this is what on the show. So this is when I came up with an idea of Canada having its own fund. It really wasn't this idea. And I know, whether they listen or not, I hope they watch our shows. I hope they listen to what we say. But where I was going when we were doing those shows, I was trying to highlight where Canada veered off path from where Norway was, and how a small country like Norway has become so bloody wealthy from taking a different policy direction in 1990 than we did. Because remember, this is the interesting part. Norway only found its first oil reserves and started really actively drilling for oil in 1969 offshore in the North Sea.
That's right.
Right? So 1969, they said, Eureka, we found oil. Same time, if Canadians remember, 1973 was the Yom Kippur War, where the embargoes happened, that we woke up and we said, oh, do you think we're in trouble?
Right.
Because the same oil price increase that we're going through now, the same $200. Now, back then in 1973, it was probably $50. But guys were filling up their truck, and the government was saying, this is crazy. We're at the will of a Middle Eastern country, in those days, OPEC, right? We're at the will of these people to put up prices at any time. We better do something. And then they created Petro-Canada, right? They get going. Norway says, wow, we got to really pay attention to this. So we better do something. So Norway takes off. Their parliament, which is interesting, in 1990 gets together and they sit down, the Norwegian parliament, sit down and they say, you know what, we're going to create a fund. And we're going to create a wealth fund. But they called it the Petroleum Fund.
That was the initial name of it.
The name was it, yeah. But over time, they politically changed it to create a pension fund, which I'm going to talk about later, which was also smart because they wanted citizens to realize that their reserves were actually taking care of them from a pension perspective in government.
Okay, well, let me ask you. Let's begin from the beginning, if we may.
Sure.
So let me ask you, when Norway created this fund,
yes,
what problem were they trying to solve? Was it a problem at the moment that they were trying to solve?
They were trying to solve a couple problems. Number one, they were trying to solve the problem of making sure that they got returns from a finite resource. So they understood right away that oil was a wonderful resource to have in their country, to have offshore, but it was finite, right? So one day it potentially could run out. It was in the North Sea. They didn't know how much of it they had. They had seen what reserves had done before. So they decided that what they were going to do is they were going to take the money they made from oil and reinvest it. So that was one of the policy decisions when they passed the legislation. One of the other things they decided was the challenge with having a resource that creates so much wealth that it overheats your economy. It actually stimulates your economy too much, because once you get that oil coming from that government subsidization, it could potentially cause a high level of inflation.
Right.
So they said, listen, we're going to put spending caps, and we're going to restrict spending at home and force as much of the money abroad to globally reinvest. Now, I'm going to give you some numbers because this is going to knock you off your seat, right? So, and I'm going to take you through who everyone is in this picture because it's very interesting. So this fund is about the fund that they've amassed. When I talk about the pension fund, this is basically, it's owned by the Norwegian government, but they have a manager of the fund, an investment manager or operator, Norges Bank, and it is the investment manager for the fund. So they're independent. They're the same, but they're independent. The government owns it. And the purpose is to invest the oil and gas revenues. So they have a very definitive objective for this fund. Now, Nords, right, NBIM as they call them, go out and they globally reinvest this money. So now this is $2 trillion sitting in this fund now. So think about it. Since 1990, when they made this strategic decision. So first of all, this fund starts up in 1990. Let's go back a minute. They say, okay, we want to take this money we're getting from oil. We want to invest it. It doesn't happen right away. So I think that's something, we got to talk about, because in Canada, we're talking about doing something totally different with our wealth fund.
Well, that's the truth, right? Norway started with an investment of profits from the oil.
Right. It was about 250 million Canadian dollars. They invested 6 years after they started really getting into drilling and selling, and so they had to make money. So they had to put some startup capital into this company, Equinor, get it going, and then Equinor started making profits, became a hugely, unbelievably profitable company, which I'll take you through in a minute. And then they started taking that money, putting into the investment fund, and then today they have 7,000, let's say, they have around 9,000 total global companies that they've invested in that are paying back dividends, interest, profits back to the fund that's sustained. So again, when we go back to the initial principles of this fund, it was to take the oil money, invest it abroad, make money back, because oil is finite, right? Made sense. They realized that right away.
The other thing they did was that they declared that the oil discovery was owned by the country, that it belonged to the people of Norway.
Yeah,
they established that right away.
Yeah, it was a resource, right?
Yeah.
And they had to build pipelines, they had to do shipping, they had to do all these things. So we as Canadians love to do this crazy thing of granting and transferring money to companies and subsidizing companies without ownership stake. It's a ridiculous concept. We've done it for years. We have to stop. It doesn't sustain. But we do it. We have done it, right? And there's tons of examples in Canada where we take public monies, we put them into companies, never got a return, never had an ownership stake, and it goes on and on.
An EV company comes to mind at the moment on that note, but yes.
Yeah, lots of those.
Yeah.
So, but you look at it now, and so now they're up and running. They have this company working, and they're so big right now, which is interesting when I dug into it. They can globally change the tech industry almost overnight. So whether it's NVIDIA, whether it's Apple, whether it's Amazon, their investments in those companies are critical, because this fund is so profitable. This $2 trillion is constantly being churned and reinvested. And last year, I looked at the last year's results. They had a 15% return on a $2 trillion fund. So this has become like a ball rolling down the hill, right? You think about a large, round ball just getting momentum. This has momentum. By the policy decision in 1990, they now have investment momentum that'll take care of that country for 100 years.
So, okay.
Yes.
Norway started with oil money.
Yes.
Canada's talking about capitalizing this fund.
It's much different, right? So we're talking about a different concept for a number of different reasons, right? And we're talking about taking public monies, putting it into a fund. So we're talking about taking $25 billion, putting it into a fund, and then trying to attract other people to invest in the fund, and then having fund managers go find projects they want to invest in Canada. Now, so there's some reasons for this. And this is what the Prime Minister didn't really articulate, because, quite frankly, it's a liberal issue, and I don't think we want to talk about it. Or his PR people probably said, let's not go close to this issue. One of the main issues that we want to do this, and it's something we talk about on almost every show, I'm sorry we do, is productivity. Our productivity is so low. And one of the reasons productivity in Canada is so low, because people won't reinvest capital into the country. Therefore, our productivity, our machinery, innovation, robotics, technology is not advanced enough because the reinvestment into the country isn't as high as it should be, whether it be in mining, manufacturing, auto. It doesn't even match even close to other developed nations. So we're at the bottom of the 32 developed nations list. So one of the reasons, which I do commend the Prime Minister on finally doing something to get this off the ground, but it isn't at all like what they do in Norway. So I just want to make sure everyone is kind of...
I'm glad that we're making this comparison, Paul, because it seems completely different.
It is completely different, and it has some interesting policy decisions that he's going to have to make along the way, because the owner of this fund is owned by the Canadian public. So much like Norway, Norway, who actually took their oil revenues, put it into a fund and created a self-sustaining company, and got Equinor off the ground. And Equinor last year did $100 billion in revenues, and it basically had an EBITDA of $37 billion, a free cash flow of $37 billion. That money keeps getting reinvested. So they made a policy decision in Norway that only 3% of the monies that come back into the fund for the fund manager can be used by government and for budget shortfalls.
So any deficit, the most they can ever use
is 3% of the fund. Right. So that's a strategic decision to not allow governments on a 4-year cycle to dip in and also use them for election favors, for to smooth the bumps in the economy and make a government look better than it should based on its performance. And they were very active and very smart in that policy decision to do that. So now we're taking $25 billion in Canada, we're putting it into a fund, and we're going to try to figure out the policies to make that fund grow.
Well, the fund is the Norway pension fund.
Yes.
As you point out, invests globally.
Yes.
Here's a major difference right there compared to this U.S. one, or to the Canadian one that you point out. This fund that the Prime Minister is talking about is going to be capitalized, and then if it attracts more investment, that investment is only going to stay in Canada. Norway reaches out to create an actual investment fund.
Yes.
That makes money for itself, doesn't just support projects. And that, I think, is significant, worth talking about.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's a huge difference, like massive difference, because our fund is internal based. Their fund is external based. So if you look at the difference, we are for creating domestic productivity and capacity within the country to get to our resources.
Right.
Norway's already done that, right? And they made the strategic decision to go abroad and reinvest. So, when we did the show on oil, I don't think there was a country or a continent around the world that Norway didn't have an interest in from a resource perspective and from a oil development perspective, wind development, solar development, and also an investment base. So they were in every country around the world, every continent. Canada's not, right? We didn't take that same strategic decision. So we're in a different we have a different set of challenges right now. We're trying to get to our resources with some funding to try to pull them out of the ground, get our productivity higher to do that. And we're trying to get people to follow the initial. So look at the government money we're talking about, the $25 billion, as seed money. So I look at it basically as it's seed money. It comes from our own public trust. And, he called it Canada's Strong Fund, which I think is a right idea. It's a capital injection, seed funding that goes in, and hopefully you'll get returns for the people. Now, the challenge with this is a little different, right? Because now in Norway, you have an oil inflow profitability in their fund. Right. So it's a pretty much guaranteed.
Every year, they're going to be able to top the fund up.
It's interesting. We just put out our fiscal update this week, and we're saying that we're below, our deficit is lower by about $11 billion than we thought it would be. We thought it came in at $61 billion. We thought it would be somewhere around $72 billion.
That's right.
So it's lower by $11 billion. It's lower by $11 billion because the price per barrel of oil is higher.
Right.
So in Norway's case, oil was the catalyst and kind of the insurance they had to get this fund going so they could reinvest.
Makes perfect sense.
In Canada, we're taking our own public money, so tax money, fees, everything government collects. We're taking that 25 billion and we're basically putting it into a fund, hoping people will follow us into the fund. A set of really key challenges now, given the structure of it, is we're going to have to make policy decisions as a government that invests in projects that have an ROI, which, quite frankly, Mike, this is an interesting discussion because Chrystia Freeland stood up in the House and had a long discussion, got booed in, I think it was her 2023 budget, got booed for saying that we had to set benchmarks for return on investment to get productivity going. She was right.
She was right on that topic, yeah. Well, how does a fund work in your mind, Paul, if it's not generating profit? I mean, okay, we're going to invest in this project or that project, or
Yeah.
I don't understand how that return is not, like you say, we've never taken a return on anything we've subsidized in this country ever. So now you're right, this is a whole new set of policies for our government to develop that says we'll invest in this project, but it has to have return on investment.
Agreed. Now that was, and that was the number one, I guess, the criticism of the Conservative Party. Their number one point was that this was going to be a boondoggle of cash that went out the door. So now, if I'm sitting in the Prime Minister's seat, I would, like Norway, come up with a set of principles and policies and a board bylaws for this company that didn't allow them to invest in projects that didn't have an ROI. So I would counter his argument, and then I would go back and I would politely actually respond to Mr. Poilievre, and I'd say to him, by the way, it was the Conservative Party that sold off Petro-Canada and made the policy decision that was contrary to what Norway did and put us in the decision where we don't have a wealth fund of $2 trillion. The only wealth fund we have is in Alberta, and because in Canada, unlike in Norway, we allow provinces and the feds to jointly agree on resource decisions. Whereas in Norway, it's a total federal issue. It's a national issue, right? So he made the criticism that this was going to be a boondoggle. It wouldn't have been a boondoggle if we would have made the decisions back in the 80s and 90s to keep Petro-Canada, reinvest the money globally, and create a wealth fund. Believe it or not, our wealthiest wealth fund in Canada right now, aside from CPP on a province basis, is in Alberta, and it only holds $25 billion. And it's dwindling now because, well, it's probably getting a little better with the price of oil. But prior to this Iran war, which I don't know, can you plan or forecast a war? You can't. But if we were on the same trajectory, if you remember, we did a show where the Premier of Alberta was standing up and saying, hey, this is going to be the first year that they're not going to be able to do transfer payments to the government.
Because the price of a barrel had bottomed out so badly.
Exactly. And she was going to be dipping into her wealth fund to use some of it to keep the services for the citizens of Alberta. Yeah. And then all of a sudden the Iran war happens, the revenue spikes, and for them, it's actually a better scenario at this point.
Paul, let me ask you this. At what point did this stop being an oil? And the reason I ask this is because if we're capitalizing something for the purpose of investing in projects within our own country, let me ask you this. At what point in Norway did this stop being an oil fund and just start being a global investment fund?
Oh, wow. In the 90s. So when they made that strategic decision, when we went took opposite pathways. But, the structure of it. So when you hit on it, Mike, and I really wanted to make sure our viewers, and we're going to put it down below, because understanding the structure and the importance of the policy decision to structure this is so key. And the brilliance of the government at that time to identify it and put those policies in place.
It feels constitutional.
It was, yeah. Well, they did it legislatively, and going and setting up an investment bank that took the monies out of the government purview. So saying, okay, this money is going to be swept. So we're not only going to fund this oil company, which was Stat Oil when it started, it became Equinor. We only got that off the ground. We started drilling for oil, setting up the investment mechanism so the money could transfer over. So, you got to imagine. So we do something called general revenue funds in Canada.
Okay.
So when money goes, whether taxes or whatever, it goes over and it goes to a general revenue fund. And then from there, it's earmarked through budgets into programs.
Okay.
Right. They decided not to do that. They decided to take an opposite track, and they took the money from themselves and they transferred it over. It was brilliant if you think about it. It was absolutely brilliant because now they're not touching it. They're not having governments manipulate it. So,
it's kind of like that bank account my wife has for us that we just, no matter what, that money doesn't get touched. No matter what, we always put this amount in.
Exactly. The wealthy barber. See, we grew up in a generation of it's funny. I just did a show with Tim Sesnick, which brilliant guy, does a Globe and Mail article every week or 2 weeks.
Incredible episode.
Yeah. So he talked to us about wealth management and all the things he does with the family group, his company. And it's interesting. As a government, the Norwegian government realized by taking this oil money, by taking the taxes and the profits and the offshore profits, putting it directly into the fund. So, and not having government touch it, and then having MBIM invest the fund, and then taking the returns and automatically reinvesting them. So not any time during this cycle does government touch it other than when they come back and they have to legislatively agree to take only up to 3% for shortfalls in any given year.
And it has to pass a vote in their legislative.
Exactly, to get that money, because it has to pass as a budget. So the number of safeguards and the number of guardrails that are thrown up to prevent governments from accessing the money and allowing this fund to build is really well thought out. And this is where we're at with this Prime Minister Mark Carney's fund. We're kind of at that pivotal moment where Canada, and I do, again, I'm not criticizing, I'm commending. I think he listened. He understands he needs a fund. He understands that productivity is a major challenge for the country right now. But what he does in the guardrails and how this fund is strategically set up will determine whether it's a success. So probably not you and I, or definitely not me, but my kids, right, will be seeing the results just like I'm seeing the results. You and I are living the results of the bad decision back it was the Mulroney government to sell off Petro-Canada when Norway went the other way. This fund will be successful or not successful based on the policies, guardrails, and procedures he puts in place now.
And how productive we get with the investments that we make and how much
the return
ROI,
on investment that we put in place. But, there should be a hurdle rate so we should be setting up a hurdle rate, which is kind of like the show I said, like I did with Tim, where, the monies that go into this fund, only so much can be accessed by government, right? The monies must be earmarked. All these policies and procedures and bylaws that get put into this company basically will dictate that, I hope. And I hope he's going to announce that soon. And then the strategic prioritization of which projects we're going to put in. And that's the tricky one. That's the one that we're not talking about right now. We just
they can't be our major projects. Like, sorry, but I just feel like these projects that are meant to bolster the country, that are our own federal projects, should not be qualified. Like this, maybe, and you, Paul, please correct me if I'm wrong, and assuming that this is what it's going to do. But in my mind, that global investment strategy that Norway has used to create a behemoth fund here makes a lot more sense than just investing solely. Should it maybe be divided up in some way? Should we be investing globally and then, trying to be the first money in on the right companies here? How do you envision this working properly?
Well, we're not. So this is interesting because I'd love to be in the position that we could actually be investing globally, but we're at least a decade away from even getting back to the lower tier of productivity in the world. So we're so far off on our productivity side. So this is going to take a long, long time to reinvest our money into projects, make sure they hurdle a return that'll make the fund build, be disciplined enough when governments change. Again, Norway being smart enough, because governments can't touch the money and they have to legislatively up to 3% only touch the money if they need it, it actually allows the fund managers to keep it going. In our case, we're going to have to allow our fund managers to invest the money in projects that have a return to make it grow. So a little different, a lot different. And those projects are the tough ones because a lot of them are resource projects. And you and I have seen over the last week, there's some really scathing news about overpriced, overvalued stocks and swindles and things going on.
Yeah, there's a gold mine, the CEO of a gold mine is going to jail this week.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and that, we've heard that throughout our lifetime, right? Of people who've overvalued.
So how do we know that the investments that we're making aren't swindles? I don't know. And that's my fear in only investing in a country that is low productivity is that our ROI is going to vanish.
Well, and that's pure poly, but not to be doom and gloom. What other choices does he have right now? See, that's where I was trying to, and I'm glad they listened on our shows. I'm glad the shows might have made an impact because quite frankly, I couldn't see another path. Like, I think this is kind of one of those Hail Mary paths we have as a country right now that we either have to try something like this because quite frankly, how do you go out to the private markets based on our productivity and where we are now and say, come to Canada, put your money in Canada, with our regulations, red tape, all the things that they have to encounter, low productivity, put your money here and hope for a return. It's pretty hard. So by seeding a fund and having the government use our public money to get people to come in and back the projects is really key. The second thing that I would advise them right now, like Norway, which we're far off the Norway model, but you can take bits and pieces of it, make sure we maintain control and ownership of whatever we jointly put money into. Right. So don't give up. Don't go doing another Petro. Don't go selling off your assets, to make it to shore. When the boat is out of fuel and you start burning the boat, the old story, and then it sinks because you basically used all the wood and you can't go any further. And then the boat sinks. Like, let's not get this going, get it profitable, get it building, all pat each other on the back, and then one day sell the fund.
That's my next concern is we tend to build great things that are profitable. The 407 in Ontario, airports across the country.
We do.
We basically gave a bridge to the U.S. that they won't let us open.
Yes.
I mean, we have a tendency to make bad decisions federally in this regard. These investments need to be heavily monitored. I have one last little question on the investment capitalization.
Sure.
Of course, we hear Pierre Poilievre out there saying, oh, he's putting it on the country's credit card. We're going to have to pay the price tomorrow. That is a perspective, I think, worth examining. But then the next question is $25 billion enough to seed a fund? I mean, we've seen $70 billion in Ontario go to bad retraining. The Arrive scam problem was billions of dollars. It seems like we have a lot of money floating around out there. Couldn't we have seeded this a little better, or would that not have been worth it?
No, it's a good point, and it's a whole other show, but I'm just going to give you a piece of it, and then we'll leave for another show. But it's very interesting yesterday when we were talking this whole conversation about OPEC and the UEN. Leaving OPEC. So this is now going to cause a bunch of issues potentially for Canada. And, I don't really know because I'm not in the heads of Ottawa and the government in Ottawa, but Whether they foresaw this, whether they were foretold, I don't really know. But now I think what we have to do is really watch what we're doing and watch what's going to come of that. Because quite frankly, now you're in a new battle. And whether the U.S. is winning that battle or losing that battle, it's hard to determine right now because, you know, you've taken some of the juice away from Iran, from Saudi Arabia, you know, the instability in oil prices. You know, if you really want to blockade and run oil prices down to a minimum level to stop them, you really have a interesting pathway now. So there's a lot more tools in the tool chest, potentially, of the United States and UEN that might be coming to bear. What the impacts are on oil in Canada and what are our next steps as far as resources and investments, that's the next decision we have to make.
It really does seem like that is the fog ahead of us, isn't it? Like, how do we actually make quality investable opportunities for ourselves that have a return?
Yeah, we're going to see in the next few days. And that decision, when that plays out, that'll tell us what our next decision is and whether or not that $25 billion is the right number or way too little.
Thanks for going through this with me. I really appreciate it. And if you have questions or comments, you think that we've missed something, that's how we get our conversations going around here. So please don't hesitate to let us know what your thoughts are on this. Norway has a behemoth fund. Canada is launching one. Will it have the same future? It's for us to watch and see and keep an eye on the government to make sure they do the right things and have the right policies. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Mike.